Welcome to the next edition of LC Online, Learning Curve Online, uh, our monthly show for people who wrote articles in the previous issue, to discuss them and to field questions about them. Welcome to everybody who is on this show. Welcome to Nimrat as well.
Thank you.
And so I want to say that Learning Curve is a magazine for teachers of primary school, teachers and heads of primary schools who want to know more about how primary schools work, and we try our best to have a focus topic, which then is a lot of people write about it, a lot of educationists, a lot of people on the ground, but mostly we want teachers of our schools and primary school teachers to actually find this relevant, and Learning Curve strives for that. And so we want to say very much that we hope that we will be able to keep this up, keep this exchange up, and we want you all to participate as much as possible. So let me introduce first Nimrat, our speaker for the evening. Actually, Nimrat doesn't need any introduction. She's been with APS for a long time, and she's also, uh, she's been in the she's very much part of APF and is in the university as well as a foundation. And so, welcome, Nimrat. And let's start off by asking you some questions, and I hope the audience will also participate.
So thank you very much, Prema.
Nimrat, yeah, the title is very interesting, Nimrat, of your article. You use the word reflections, which hints at conclusions arrived at later. Did online programs call for more reflection so you could keep modifying your teaching strategy? Did the trainers discuss among themselves to arrive at the best practices? We would like you to give an example if you can.
So yes, I think the title was not so much thought as it came naturally because this was a huge transition for all of us because as I mean all of us in the sense that all of us within the team who've been working together for so many years doing these programs, we were so used to the face-to-face mode that the shift to the online mode was something that we really had to think about. So when and the kind of thinking involved not just uh, the objectives of the program or the content, but actually deep thought about the transaction itself. It took us some doing. The first program that I was part of that was conducted online was a teacher induction, and I was coordinating that program. I wasn't facilitating. And at one point in time, um, we were asking ourselves, why are we talking about this so much? Because generally, when you do a program, you have a meeting to draw up a plan, and then you do your own session planning, everything. Maybe come together once, and during the program, talk about it in the evening and discuss it, and then carry on. But here, prior to the program itself, I think for almost a week, we met every day to talk about how the sessions would go, what kind of content would come in. And like I mentioned already, this is not something that we had ever been part of as either facilitators or as participants. So we had to kind of imagine that space and how things would happen. And I think talking to each other really helped. And not just for planning this particular program, but even as a larger group, we used to keep coming together to discuss how things were going with each of us, because all of us were doing different things using different modalities um, to transact these online programs. So we would keep coming back and talking, and like you said, Prema, looking at best practices, what worked. So yes, it was a period of learning for all of us, and I think a lot of learning through discussion and sharing. And so I guess For example, the time a session should be for. So to determine that, I remember reaching out to a lot of our faculty at the university who had been doing sessions with students to ask what is the right amount of time that someone can be online and concentrating really hard. So we came up with 1.5 hours, which is not to say that later on we didn't extend that time, but that's an example of the kind of thinking that went into planning the program. Much, much deeper than would have been, in case of a face-to-face program. What kind of resources would we use? How would we ensure interaction? How would we make sure that people were connected with what we were saying? These were questions that generally wouldn't come up that intensively in a face-to-face program, but in this case, we were spending a lot of time thinking about these. So I hope that answers your question, Prema. Uh, you're on mute, Prema.
This must have involved a lot of a much greater thought and much greater, shall we say, self introspection than a face to face program, wouldn't it, Nimrat?
Yes, absolutely right. Uh, because, like I mentioned, we were used to the face-to-face programs, and this was a different modality, and
Yes.
a modality within which we knew we didn't have as much time as we would in a regular program. We would meet the participants at say 9 o'clock in the morning and be with them till 5:36 in the evening, and there would be scope, if you take 5 minutes extra of the tea break or the lunch break, or just finish 5 minutes later, it's something that would kind of not be as um, serious in the transaction of the program as it would online, because online we felt that the durations, also because of the constraints of the time that we had, time slots, and the people we were working with needing to, for us to finish within a certain period. So all those constraints were there. Also, the thought that the kind of things we depend on in online, in face-to-face programs, like I said, the flexibility of time, the ease of having people in front of you. If you have 30 people in front of you, talking to them, making eye contact, being able to kind of infer whether they are interested in what's happening, or whether you need to kind of do something that we all do as teachers, as facilitators. We read our participants' body language to get a sense of how things are going. So that was completely missing in this online interaction, where you just see these little boxes on the screen. So that time constraint, the idea of not being able to connect with participants as much as we are used to doing, and also the the kind of the absence of the kind of scaffolding that we managed to do in a face-to-face program. So the face-to-face program, you have these resources which you kind of depend on. You have reading that you give, and then you can go around with talking to the groups, and kind of helping them get a sense of where you want them to go, and also then taking inputs from all of them and building a case. The kind of ease there is with doing that kind of a transaction, we felt that that is not possible in an online mode. Again, because of the fact that we can't scaffold each group's discussion, it isn't always possible, and because of the limitation of time. So we felt
Right.
that we need to kind of, tailor our resources to the medium. So there was a lot of thinking about what kind of resources we could use, what are the things we could do. For example, I personally like to use these Pixar animation videos, kind of use them as metaphors for something that I want to discuss. So that just wasn't possible in an online mode, because uh, first of all, maybe the numbers would be large. Then secondly, you don't understand, you can't communicate with each person who wants to say something, because of the limitation of the medium, or the fact that won't be sufficient time. The impact itself, is not there. Then, of course, the worry of technology, in the sense of whether the video would play, would everyone be able to hear it, would everyone be able to connect to it, and this whole. And I think another issue was the need to keep to be sure that participants stay engaged. Uh, was also something that we thought of, and it's something that we try to think of how to kind of make sure that everyone stayed connected. So we did things like, giving them little tasks to do, maybe kind of have them respond to something on WhatsApp, or send in some kind of an assignment, or have some kind of an activity or an exercise in during the duration of the session for them to respond to. So these were some considerations that really kind of kept us occupied in
Right,
planning sessions.
right.
So yeah.
The next question has, some parts which we found really intriguing. In the first part of your article, you have outlined the novel features of the online platform. That is, the number who participate, the illusion of participation. You're thinking, that because you're getting questions, you don't really know the same people are asking. The illusion of participation and the duration. Uh, these are the disadvantages. Do you think the learning was less than ideal on because of these features? Were there any other strategies that you used to overcome this? And this is, and you just mentioned the inability to read body language. Do you think that is also one of the disadvantages of this online platform? But we are particularly interested in knowing, this how you overcame number, illusion of participation, and duration. Because you see, I think that is something that teachers also faced when they were doing online classes with their students.
Right. So see, I was just thinking before this webinar if there are any, kind of general principles that I have been able to derive from these 10 months of sometimes coordinating programs, sometimes facilitating myself. And I don't think that there are, any simple kind of rules by which we can plan these things. There were different things that we did for every kind of situation. And sometimes we just went with the numbers. So one was, of course, to have parallel sessions, but parallel sessions would have meant more number of facilitators. So
Right.
where that was possible, of course, we did that. So we tried to keep the number um, as much as it would be in a face-to-face program, but it was not always possible to do that. In which case, one modality that we tried out was that we would have a webinar in the morning, say,
Okay.
and then give them some kind of a task, some kind of a question. So this webinar would essentially be around an idea or a concept. So in the morning, you talk about maybe why residential schools are important, for example, and you kind of uh, leave participants with some question around what their thoughts are around it, or maybe you've discussed some particular aspect which you want them to think about more. So you leave them with that, and the participants could then split up into smaller groups. So the morning session would be more like a webinar,
Right.
and they would kind of split up into smaller groups, and then a peer would coordinate the discussion, because if you have 200 participants in the morning and you split them up into 5 groups in the evening, then it would not be possible for the facilitator. Though sometimes our facilitators did go and join these smaller groups if they could. But the best approach would be to have these peers coordinate these discussions.
Right.
Sometimes we had a session with these coordinators before the program to kind of orient them to what would happen, or we would provide with them with enough scaffolds in terms of questions, or sometimes someone would give a video or something, send across a PPT for for them to be able to have this kind of a discussion within themselves.
Right.
That was one modality. Then there were some webinars which were intended to inform or to orient participants, where if someone wanted to ask a question or give an input, they would put it on chat. So those were the, webinars where we said, okay, 400 teachers, fine, it's all right. We will have this discussion with them. I mean, not discussion, we will have this orientation or we will have this webinar and hope that whoever has a question or whatever puts it up on chat. Of course, it didn't happen. You don't have
Right.
the kind of participation you want wasn't possible. So then another thing was that in the middle of a session, to make sure that people are listening, or we can assess that they are engaged, you put on a quiz or a PPT with some questions or some kind of an activity. So those were other things that we could do. But like I said, sometimes it was like an illusion, because um, generally participants are on mute, so it seems like they are very engaged, they're listening, there's no disturbance. And but actually you don't know whether they're actually connected, whether they're actually listening,
Right.
also whether they are facing any technological problems. So
Hmm.
that thing. So that's why I called it an illusion of participation, because sometimes makes you feel good. The chat is buzzing and there are lots of comments coming and everything, and you say, oh my, this is great. But then it's just four or five people maybe who are you know
Going on.
um, in those comments and things. So that was another issue. About duration, though, like I said, as moving on, we have extended the 1.5 hour. We felt that 1.5 hour in the morning, 1.5 hour in the evening would be all right, because there's a certain amount of fatigue we felt that sets in with this kind of an online transaction. And I think as facilitators, we also felt it, because um, to be able to because the kind of concentration and the kind of attention, the kind of and maybe I think it's also a case of not getting back that response which kind of really energizes you and makes you all excited about what you're doing. So we did start increasing the duration a bit, but we would try and give a break in the middle. So that
Okay.
was, there would be cases where, especially with the smaller groups, when you have 20 or 30, then and you're working with the same group over, say, maybe 5, 6 days, then you start getting these, uh, in fact, I want to say that one thing that I found very, very interesting is that even online relationships were built. So that was
Okay.
something which was very different. I never expected that to happen, because in a face-to-face program, within 2 or 3 days, you're having these discussions over tea, over lunch, and if it's a residential program, then you're meeting each other over breakfast at dinner. So I never expected that the kind of ease that comes in face-to-face programs, the kind of almost the friendliness that comes, would also emerge in these online programs. And during the program also, like people would maybe send a message on WhatsApp or call. So that was something that was very interesting, so I wanted to mention that um, when the programs are of a slightly longer duration, not just a couple of days, or obviously not just a webinar, but there were instances where people had questions, and um, the facilitator also wanted to continue a discussion, but it had to end because of the time slot.
Thanks.
So there are some questions, Prema. Do you?
Yeah, we have Amira Fatima asking a question here. How would you suggest that we can tailor our teaching as we are coming back to physical classes, but again with the limitation of no group activities, and also limiting online mode. This is from Amira Fatima.
Right. So, if I understand the question properly, it's talking about the reopening of educational institutions, but the issue of not been
No
able
group
to
activities and no,
maintain
and there is no,
physical
yes,
distance.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
And also on the and simultaneously carrying on with the online mode. So,
yes,
no easy answers, and I cannot claim to be an expert at all. But all I can think about is that just having the children together in the classroom would, I think, enable um, a lot of things that are not happening otherwise. The coming back of interaction, direct interaction, the coming back of peer interaction, all these things I think would help. And I think maybe not uh, group activities in the sense of everyone doing the same thing, but doing things that can come together, like breaking up an activity into something children could do individually and then bringing it back together. That is the only thing I can suggest.
right. Thanks. Uh, Another question from the audience is from Srinivas Kulkarni, who is asking, what are the strategies that we can use as a facilitator to ensure that the session is interactive during online mode teacher engagement?
So, should I show some examples, Prema?
Yes,
Do we
that
have?
would be very good. That would be very good.
So, again, I'm not sure if this would work for everyone, but I would just kind of give some examples. My examples are mostly from, I should clarify, working with teachers, principals, teacher educators. So, one thing that that at least I did was to, and I think all my because I keep saying we because this is such a collaborative effort. So we worked very hard on PPTs where actually we would have preferred a board. So something as simple as showing some an idea around circle of concern, influence, and action, which we would just draw on a board. We used animation on the PPT, so trying to kind of create interest so that people would respond. Then similarly, kind of working on uh, synthesizing, speaking, synthesizing, and then inviting responses from others. Though we felt that kind of I've written hurrying consensus because we also tailored our resources in a sense to what we would have done normally. Like one problem was that what we would have done normally in an entire day, we were kind of forced to do. Though we reduced the content, we said that okay, only 1 or 2 key ideas in a 1.5 hour session, but a regular 6 7 hour day in a program where we would have done things in more detail, we had to get our people, our participants to reach some kind of a conclusion, and while ensuring that there was some kind of, like you mentioned very rightly, about interaction and participation. So if we felt that a case study was something that needed to be used, we truncated the case study, we made it smaller, read it together on the screen, and then created these kind of templates which could be filled through interaction. So again, under normal circumstances, you would have given it to the group and maybe given a few questions, and maybe given different questions to the different groups for them to come up with something that could help take you forward. But here we used one template, and through discussions with the participants on various aspects of the case study that we wanted to highlight, we we already kind of we filled up whatever they told us to and merged it with what we had already wanted to highlight. So in a sense, we were hurrying the process, but trying to make sure that everyone participated. Similarly, then going forward, another template in which we took their inputs. Um, uh, in a smaller group, you can identify people on the basis of names or maybe the districts they come from, the schools they come from. In a larger group, it becomes problematic. So I'm talking about interactions that happen in a group of, say, 30, 40 people. So there you could at least keep track, and we always had a list of names by our side, so that helped. So based on that, you fill up a template. So again, whatever you ask them to do, you have some kind of an alternative ready, because it is not always certain that you'll get the kind of responses that you would in a face to face program. So hopefully it all comes from them. Otherwise, you can present them with an example. So in a way, it became sometimes a compromise of telling instead of asking. So, for example, this activity about why it is important for what is important for the beginning teacher to know, and how it can be assessed, whether it can be assessed through a paper pencil test. This is a recent program that I did with teacher educators. So, under normal circumstances, this is something that the group would come up with, but because of the modality we were in, and the idea of just telling, of course, is not okay at all, because if you just tell, then what's the point of even having this interaction? So just listing the expectations, and then asking if it's important, whether it can be assessed. So this in itself generated some kind of discussion, because some people had different ideas. Some people felt like, for example, social context of learner. Someone said that, how can you know it? And theoretically, you have to be with the children to understand. So these kind of discussions were generated by these kind of questions. I think questions are very, very important in the whole thing. So these kind of templates, questions, everything kind of helps. And again, this is an example of how I used a case study in an online program. So the case study, I just took out bits from the case study, whatever I thought was important, showed them a video. Luckily, there was an associated video, and then spoke about what the teacher had done, and then used this as an example of how they could also uh, take up these kind of studies in their context. So these are some examples of what we used. I also want to share another resource which a colleague of mine used. Chandni Khanduja is her name. So I requested her to send a worksheet she had prepared. This is for teachers of social science. So she wanted them to engage with the position paper of the National Focus Group on Teaching of Social Science, but in an online mode. How would she do it? So in the morning, she gave them an orientation or whatever, and then she gave them this as a task to do, to read, which she later discussed in an evening webinar. So what would normally happen in a face-to-face program would be that people would sit, they would discuss it, they would talk to each other. So in a way, she kind of forced them to talk to themselves. So readings, a little question around that, another little portion, another set of questions, um, identifying certain issues and asking them to think about them, asking them to reflect on their own experiences. So these are kind of things that we tried. These are just some examples. So, but I think they worked for us.
There's another question from the audience. Please give details of what worked for you with examples. That is to say, what strategies can we adopt, I think, as teachers, is what uh, Pooja Mehta means by this question.
Okay. So I think basically, broadly, if we talk about it, uh, so I'm assuming that you're talking about dealing with the same set of participants here, which would make things much easier in my view. Because we also did something in which we engaged with the same set of people over a longer period of time. And in that case, I think, like some of the examples I've shared already. And if I could just share my screen again, I also try to identify some principles that we um, used to inform our planning. So I don't know how visible this is going to be, but it'll help me. So basically, one thing was that we gave every participant a voice. So even if it wasn't heard by the others. So what we did, how we did that was that, because the if the group is big, then okay, you kind of maybe send them into breakout rooms to talk to each other and then come back and speak to you. Or you have the evening, like I mentioned, a separate kind of a session where the peer facilitates a discussion, provided you always give them some kind of a scaffold in the form of questions, a video, PPT, a template which they have to fill up. So that in that way, even if all say 30, 40 people didn't hear that participant's voice, but that participant had a chance in that smaller group to speak. The other thing was to have parallel sessions, which I don't know would be applicable in your context or not. Then requiring participants to send in some response. So some task is given. Um, the task is, of course, meant to be done individually because you can't work in groups, but they would send responses. So the responses would come on WhatsApp, or they would upload their reflections every evening. So these were some, ways in which you got written feedback of how your sessions were going up, or what people were taking away from them. Of course, it meant a lot of hard work for the facilitators, and they used to be, as it is, exhausted after work, and then after the whole sessions and everything, and then they would go through the WhatsApp during their lunch and reflections in the evening. But that is a kind of commitment you can keep up for a short period. But if you have a longer interaction with your participants, then you can find more reasonable ways of manageable ways of doing this. Maybe you can have alternate days. They can send in something. You can read that whatever their responses are, etc. It gives you an idea of what's happening. Also encouraging people to use chat. So that was also a way in which people would send in their responses. So it's another thing is that you feel that people might be hesitant using technology, or sending in responses on chat, but actually, because you're not upfront in front of other people, you feel sometimes safer sending your responses. So the chat option is something that, and chat can be saved so you can track and see who has not responded. So these are some things you can do. And of course, the have brief interactions, brief questions, brief activities, quizzes, templates for them to fill, but have it more frequently. The other thing is that the facilitator must be free to concentrate on this sharing and interaction, which means that the facilitator has to not bother at all about the technology. And even the facilitator it would be helpful if someone else was managing the chat function. So this would be something that would be helpful also. And of course, planning is like every little detail. It is almost like storyboarding, accounting for every minute, for every moment of the session. So that kind of interaction has to be embedded into this kind of a planning. And of course, sorry, tailoring your resources. So I've already showed some examples of how we kind of modified the resources we generally use in face-to-face mode. And another important thing that we did was that we tried to keep it simple. We didn't try and cover too much. So that was a compromise in a sense, because uh, you the amount of content you have to cover gets reduced. So, but it's a necessary compromise, I think. So I hope that helps.
All of it helps greatly, Nimrat. Next question is from Swati Kukreti. She's saying, we are facing issues with students online. This is mostly about attendance in live classes, delivery of technical courses online to the students, and trainers' participation during workshop. They join, but they keep quiet.
Yeah.
Nimrat, were you able to hear
Yes,
me?
yes. Yes, yes, I did. And I'm smiling because there was an instance where I experienced this also. And it can be quite troublesome because the same thing. I mean, this is the opposite of the illusion of participation. So all I can say is that what we did during the case study I showed you, the templates after that. was a response to this kind of a situation, where we felt that, my colleague and I, who were co-facilitating that program, we felt that we need to have more, we need to look at our content really. That's one. And the other is, I don't know how large the group that Swati ji is working with is, but if it's a smaller group, then what you could try is um, maybe inform people that you will be giving them certain assignments, and brief small assignments, something to think about, and have them, speak up, or starting with some kind of a template which they would be forced to engage with. So all I can say is that that's what worked for us. So you can try it out.
Thanks, Nimrat. And the next question is from Sajida Yar Khan. What skills should educators and trainers possess to inspire their students online?
I it's a difficult question to answer. I can just talk about the skills that have kept us afloat. Um, uh, I think just the usual stuff that we already knew, and of course the confidence to use the technology, because that's something that some of us got together and experimented with the platforms that we would need to use before we actually started doing that. So that's one big thing. I think you need support. You need technological support. You need a good platform. So and we were very fortunate in getting that almost always, in the sense that someone would take care of the technology aspect, would make sure the links were working, people were coming on time, all that stuff. So that kind of support. And the other skills, I think, are those of that we all need anyway, whether it's a face to face situation or online, of being able to identify content that would be interesting, of being able to create resources that students would be able, participants would be able to engage with, and planning, of course, planning in more detail than we would maybe in a face to face situation. Just a little more, in the sense that because your time is limited, and because the face to face interaction is missing. So I think planning would be one very big part of it. So content selection, I mean, these are things that we need anyway. Uh, and also a little bit around how to get an idea of how much participants are getting of what you're saying and doing. So I think the activities and the kind of focused interactions would take care of that. So hope that helps.
Yes. The next question I'm going to ask you is from, the things that we were thinking about at LC itself. One of the things is, after almost 10 months of, online classes, are you now in a better position today of the medium? Do you understand it better? Are you in greater control, for instance, of the medium? Have you come up with to the level of the offline mode used earlier, do you think?
No, I really don't think the online mode matches the offline mode. And I think each session that I take, because of course it depends on the objectives, the number of participants, the purpose, all those things, of course, are very, very important. But um, I think I still need to put in as much planning as for the offline programs, plus a little more on making sure that my resources are interesting and kind of usable online, that no technological glitch is going to cause the video to not play, or the you know uh, the PPT is not clear enough or something. So I think that kind of detailed planning is still required. And I would say that I spend more time planning for online interactions than I would otherwise. So, and so I wouldn't say that I'm on top of things. So
Nimrat, here's a question that's related to that, I think. So, but do you think that there are several components to this online and offline teaching that all teachers know about. But do you think you're able to impart the knowledge component at least, though you might not get quite the same reaction or might not be able to quite judge it in the same way? But do you think you're getting across what you were planning to deliver as part of your training? Do you think you're getting that across?
Mhm. So, thanks for asking that, Prema, because I missed out something that I should have emphasized. The program that we've been doing. So, one part of it is, of course, ensure using the interaction to assess whether participants are with you, you know, in the sense that whatever you want to say, they are engaging with it and they are responding to it. So, one would be, of course, the online exercises that one would plan. The other is the tasks that we usually assign. So in the morning, if we have a webinar, we give them a task, and in the there's a break, they do something. And the evening, we discuss their responses to the task, or kind of get a sense of how they've been thinking about and engaging with whatever we gave them. Um, the other is that having some kind of reflections uploaded in the evening. And I just want to share that it was very interesting that the kind of reflections that in a few programs, the kind of reflections that we got um, indicated, they were much deeper than what was coming on in the online interactions. Maybe participants had more time to think about it and reflect. So that was very, very interesting. And we've also done something like a program in which we have engaged with participants prior to, say, a workshop. We can, I'll just explain what it is. So we engaged with them a week before, gave them a task to do, met them for a week, had these webinars in the morning, a task for the afternoon, discussion on a task in the evening, and then again like that for 5 days, and finally gave them something to do, an assignment, and for which we got back to them later. We had smaller sharing sessions. So in a way, we've tried to assess that the objectives of the program are being met in a way, but it's not a satisfactory assessment always. Not always, especially if it's a smaller kind of a program and everything. So, but in that sense, even face-to-face programs, you're not always certain. But
Right.
I would say that it is a far better approach. I mean, a far more satisfactory approach than the online programs. I also want to mention that one good thing about this online programs is that we have been able to reach people who would not be participants otherwise. So,
Right.
for example, with one department, uh, because of the nature of the program that it was online, people didn't have to travel, they didn't have to leave their work, etc. So we engage with teachers, with school leaders, with district coordinators. These are residential schools, so with caretakers, the people in the mess, with the non-academic staff. So these are people who would, generally engage with teachers and principals, maybe some district coordinators. But in this case, we managed to reach everyone. So that is a very unique feature, a very unique aspect of this approach, that it was possible to reach everyone like that.
Right. There's another question from Samayat Shala. Our teachers want to take forward this online learning even after with their students, even after school reopens. What are some of the conversations what are some of the conversations they can have to ensure that they are able to carry it forward? So, is there going to be a popularity? This is a question that's quite interesting because
Yeah.
is it going to be popular even after schools reopen? Is online going to be, one of the very many methods? Nimrat, what do you think?
So I've been thinking about this in the context of teachers, which I will respond to later. Let me try and figure this one out first. So, online. as we know that even now, as some schools are reopening in states, teachers are doing some face-to-face classes because maybe the older children are coming back, or it's alternate days, and they're also doing online classes. But I personally don't think that um, teachers I mean, if they want to do it, if they want to take it forward, then I guess it would be maybe as some kind of a supplemental learning, or maybe to make up for the loss of learning that has happened due to schools closing in the pandemic. But to take it forward as a primary means of learning, I don't think that would be suitable. I don't think our experience so far, if we look at the last year, almost the entire year, so online learning with students has actually meant that a lot of students have been left out of learning, because even students who are more privileged in terms of having families that can afford the kind of devices needed for online learning, learning has not happened the way it should have. I think if one reads papers and reads talks to people and everything, it's only students whose parents are very invested in their education who've been able to make this online learning meaningful. And as we know, that's only a very small fraction of our population. So actually, the larger majority has been struggling and has virtually been deprived of any kind of learning
Yes,
during this period.
yes, yes,
So,
absolutely, absolutely. Here, the question one we wanted to ask you from LC was one of your observation, the need to keep screen time to a minimum is an ever-present criterion. So breakout rooms end up having uh, suboptimal usage. Can you explain this?
of course, this is a personal view, and I'm sure there are other people who had more positive experiences with breakout rooms. But uh, when you're doing this kind of an online program, you bring together a set of people who really don't know each other, and then you put them into a breakout room for say 15 minutes or 20 minutes, because the amount of time that you're engaging with them would be limited. The kind of conversations that need to happen might not really happen. On the other hand, if you have someone who can take charge, and like I mentioned, the coordinators, the learning coordinators, who would peers who would facilitate this kind of discussion, then that would of course be very, very useful in this kind of a situation. But personally, I feel that these smaller group interactions, if you think of the face to face offline interaction where you have smaller groups and the facilitator moves across groups, that kind of a ease is not there with the breakout rooms. So that is why I felt that that was one of my thoughts. But like I said, as people are getting more and more used to online interactions and the duration of programs is extending, so then of course this would be more useful.
Yeah. So Nimrat, there are lots of advantages to online classes. For instance, there are some who feel that it saves time. A lot of the physical difficulties of getting to work in an overcrowded city, particularly school students coming all the way from somewhere, teachers going from somewhere. All those things are saved. Do you feel you, as a trainer of trainers, did you feel that, as you already mentioned, you were able to reach people who might not have come there if it hadn't been online? But do you think that is something that you might use even later uh, to uh, to do your training, even if it's not a very popular kind of technology, it's popular kind of method?
Right. So I think, like I mentioned, even for school students, as a primary mode of interaction, as a primary mode of this kind of professional development, I don't think the online mode would be suitable for the many reasons that I've mentioned already. But on the other hand, as some form of continuing engagement. So, for example, you have a face-to-face program, and then you engage with that set of teachers over a period of time, and that is something that could be certainly explored and be useful. But some kind of a blended mode would be necessary, and for introducing ideas, concepts, approaches, new stuff, I think a face-to-face mode would be absolutely necessary. So, and interestingly, I just wanted to share that something that might be, kind of not directly related, but because of the kind of programs that have happened, because of the necessity of involving teachers also as peers in discussions, etc. Um, at least with one set of people that we work with, there's this increasing trust in their own people. So which for a couple of years we've been trying to convince them to set up an academic resource group that would work on capacity building within the system, but they were not really convinced. So but seeing how peers have managed interactions and everything, so there's this growing trust in their abilities. So if you work with a set of people and in a face-to-face mode, co-create resources, co-create plans, etc. And then, because it is not possible for teachers to leave schools or travel to the same venue, then maybe they could do some kind of a blended mode, and for us to stay in touch with them could also be possible. But certainly, I don't see a substitute for the offline, the face-to-face mode. Um, Maybe some part of an online interaction, but largely, I think for me personally, I think the offline mode would be better once the
Right.
everything
Right.
settles, travel and everything.
Here's a question from somebody in the audience who hasn't put down his name. He or she is saying, what is your experience of training the teacher educators of government schools or teachers from rural areas vis-a-vis training people, teachers from cities? Has there been any material difference? Has there been any change of modalities or methods that you've used,
Not
Nimrat?
this is with reference to the online mode.
Yes,
Um,
online mode, with the online
Yeah,
mode.
so right. No. I don't really see any difference. The only thing is that there are certain areas where there might be a problem with connectivity, and there have
Right,
been instances where there's no electricity or the phone is discharged or something like that. But in terms of content or interaction, I don't think I can't think of any change in approach or anything that we've made.
right,
So.
right, right. So, and what about language? That's the question. Whether you use both languages, Hindi and English, and how
Yeah.
do you do? Right,
So I think basically whatever changes we made to our resources in English were the same. We use the same approach to change our resources in
right,
Hindi. So
right,
the approach remained the same, and since the facilitator would always have someone to support on chat, and Teams, at least I know, allows a facility of even Zoom of writing in Hindi. So it has been not problematic at all. It's not been an issue at all.
right. Now,
Yeah.
here's one question that we have wanted to ask you at Elsie, and that is, how do you actually, we'd like you to just describe the planning for a typical session, the steps you take, and how you measure its efficacy.
Right. So planning is not very different, like I mentioned, in terms
Earlier.
of content selection or kind of how you're going to proceed, etc. But the big difference comes in deciding that what are the key ideas I can cover in this period of time, and which is of course greatly reduced from that of a online program. And uh, I think the focus of how to, I think there's a more conscious effort to catch the audience in terms of where earlier I would not maybe make a PPT, just use a whiteboard. I would use a PPT. Now we found that to be something as simple as that to be very helpful. And also there's more anticipation in terms of how the time will go. So in a face-to-face program, it's very easy to have a plan B. So if you feel that this set of readings is not working, you have another set. Or if you feel this activity is not catching on, then you have something else. If you feel there's an empty space and you want to break the monotony, you have a video. So the kind of planning for an online session would be far more detailed in terms of choosing resources or planning, like I said, almost storyboarding the entire interaction. That would be one. And the efficacy, like I said, there's always an illusion of participation. So that, of course, one has to be very, very conscious of that. Not take it for granted that um, everything's going great, everyone's participating. So the frequency of checking back, I think, increases. One thing I think I've missed is the kind of more passionate exchanges that happen in a face-to-face workshop. So more opposing views coming up, or more counter arguments, etc. It's so much more politer online, which I don't mean disrespectfully. That's just a joke. In terms of people don't pursue certain lines of argument online. That's something I've experienced. So where you would end up with a detailed discussion on an issue, here you have two or three exchanges and then someone says, okay, it's all right, yeah. So I think just to get people interested and excited, that is a large part of the planning, um, which of
Right.
course is important in offline sessions as well, but more so in online sessions, because offline sessions
Right.
you have scope to play around. So
Rizwan Siddiqui wants to ask you whether you can name some of the courses and training that will be beneficial for teachers.
oh, I'm so sorry. Offhand, I can't. I'm so sorry. I have to get back to you on that. So, in
Uh,
terms of, uh,
so,
um,
Nimrat, yeah, were you going to say something? Sorry.
no, no, no. I'm just trying to figure out in 1 second, but I can't get any answers right away. So,
So I'd like to ask you, can you draw parallels, let's say, between, training the trainers and teachers taking classes online? Do you think their problems and their challenges were similar? Can you give tips to, teachers who, I think they would be similar in some way. So maybe you can give some tips to our teachers to tell how it could be even more effective, or some of the challenges that you faced, which you think they might have also faced.
I don't know, Prema. I think the two sets of the two situations are very different. One is because teachers have a very, very continuing engagement with their learners, whereas for us it is a shorter kind of engagement. So of course having a longer engagement is entirely more beneficial in this mode. And also I think uh, the kind of responsibility to carry over a period of time, a long period of time, so that is the period for us is much briefer in terms of the programs that we do. So I think just the strategies, the examples that I shared, to think of. Besides that, I also want to say that, like I mentioned already, every program is unique, every situation is unique. So it's not as if I've come up with a set of principles that would work in every situation. So for students, I think the situation is quite different, and the approaches too.
Right, right. So, do you think that, this whole pandemic situation made us scramble for solutions, and we somehow hit on this online mode? And you think people have risen really remarkably well? It seems to me that everyone's risen to the occasion in a remarkably good way. What do you
That's
think about
true.
that?
Yeah, that's very true, Prema, and that's a very positive view to take. It's just that one worries about because you asked about students.
Hmm.
You know, the vast majority have been left behind. That
Hmm.
is what one is really concerned about. But I think teachers have really worked very hard, and as you said, risen to the occasion. So, and schools reopen, then I'm sure their work will be they will reap the benefits of all the hard work they've put in right
Hmm.
now.
Hmm. Yes, yes. I think that everybody has been without missing a beat. They've gotten to the stride and they've managed to keep it going and solve problems as they came up. And as you say, they have the same group, so maybe that's an advantage. But I still think, what would be your 4 points, 4 takeaways, or 4 points from this whole experience, Nimrat? And do
Okay.
you have any clarity on when you might come out of this online and go back to your, well-liked face-to-face meetings?
So the planning is on for face-to-face meetings. I suppose end Feb March is when we start. And my takeaways is that it's very important to plan. Very important to plan. It's very important to be realistic about what you can achieve in the time that you have, and set very clear objectives. The third is to know that people are engaging, in a different kind of a mode. So make sure there are opportunities for them to engage. And fourth is work very hard to get responses from participants, and know that you have to work harder, more, do more in this situation than you would in a normal offline
Yes.
situation.
But I think more or less the requirements are the same, aren't they, Nimrat? Working hard or being prepared or
Yes.
being
Yeah,
ready to
true.
answer
True,
the
very true.
questions, right? The
Yeah,
only thing that's missing is the actual interaction that happens during any class, especially when we are dealing with adults as the trainers themselves are, and they bring to the table a whole lot of experience, don't they? I mean, they've
yeah.
been in the classroom and they know what they're doing, and it must be quite a daunting task, Nimrat.
Yes, actually, what one has really missed is the learning because of
Right.
the reduced interaction from the participants. I feel as if my learning has been truncated in these 10 months.
Yes. So unfortunately, we have to close now because it's our time's up. Otherwise, I'm sure Nimrat would give us such tremendous insights into the whole experience, which would be very useful to all of us. Nimrat, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you,
Thank
audience. This is for you, and we hope that you will continue to join us in all our subsequent programs. And all those who are watching, thank you for sparing the time. Thank you for being here. Thank you to all the people who asked questions and made it so interesting. Thank you very much.